first time I played Tempe, Arizona, it was August. And I wasn't used to the heat. It was one of those days when it was 112. Now, somehow, after it's 110, it might as well be 1,000 for me. Is that 110 for some reason? It's just a line. You open the door to the hotel and you feel... And I go out and they're picking me up for the show. And it's like walking underwater. And the valet has a mist system because people die before their car comes. Here's your car. The guy picks me up, and I never met him before. He's kind of grumpy, though. And he's driving me to the club, and I'm miserable. I'm depressed. It's so hot. I should have booked this in the late fall. How am I going to perform? It's so hot. Oh, God.
Good morning. It's Friday, Aristotle Friday, November the 3rd, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and Pepe Romero, we will have no free lunch, rules for radical conservatives, rules for retrogrades, rules for patriots, Bishop Robert Barron, Ayn Rand quote of the day, my take, and Aristotle for everybody, difficult thought made easy. And all that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I shouldn't change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you, thank you. And now, there's no free lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
Under capitalism, the common man enjoys amenities which in ages gone by were unknown and therefore inaccessible even to the richest people. But of course, these motor cars, television sets, and refrigerators do not make a man happy. In the instant in which he acquires them, he may feel happier than he did before. But as soon as some of his wishes are satisfied, new wishes spring up. Such is human nature. Ludwig von Mises. The reality of human nature to which von Mises speaks here is a primary reason to avoid materialistic foundations to defend free enterprise. The consumption of a good brings us temporal happiness. The production of a good can bring us dignifying satisfaction as image bearers of the ultimate creator. The aim of free enterprise and the aim of her defenders must never be the mere temporal happiness that comes from a satisfying bite of food or intrigue that comes from use of a new technology. Rather, it is the human flourishing that freedom and our productive capacity are most qualified to bring. And human flourishing is exponentially deeper and wider than a mere sugar high from a consumer product.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you, thank you. And now, rules for radical conservatives.
And not just the college kids. Given the blazing success of Head Start, mandatory preschool for everyone. It's never too early to start the summer indoctrination camps. We'll outlaw homeschooling, which everyone knows produces only fascist Christian gun nuts. Squeeze out the Catholic schools, whose very existence in this country is an affront to the divine separation of church and state. So beautifully articulated absolutely nowhere in the Constitution, and herd all the little beggars into government schools. This happy state of affairs, of course, was only a gleam in my daddy's eye when he and his fellow boomers marched smartly off to college instead of off to war in the 1960s. Dorms were still segregated then, by sex I mean, and cohabitating off campus, if not actually illegal, was considered something very naughty indeed. You had a hard time checking into a hotel room unless you were married, or could fake it convincingly, and there was as brisk a trade in phony wedding rings as there was in fake draft cards. Not that I've ever seen either of those things, real or fake. Although Che and Uncle Joe and the rest of the gang may not have been heading for Vietnam, they were still spoiling for a fight and down for the struggle. If those who went to Nam were not our crowd, dear, if you know what I mean, the regular Joes, the guys who were ticketed for gas station attendant before Uncle Sam punched them a new number. The suckers going over there for a year to kill some commies for Christ and then come back and marry their high school sweetheart. Those who went to Berkeley and Columbia were made of finer, if not sterner, stuff. It was on. The amazing thing was that their professors joined them at the barricades. It was like the communists and the National Socialists. Far from being natural enemies, they took one look at each other and realized that ultimately they were on the same side. Sure, there was that little matter of grades and such, but that was quickly disposed of via pass-fail. Classrooms became venues for sit-ins instead of Shakespeare. The assault on the patriarchy began, as the canon of Western civilization, basically all those boring old books, paintings, scientific discoveries, and musical masterpieces by dead white punks like Dickens, Leonardo, Newton, and Beethoven, were swept into the ash cans of history, to be replaced with, well, nothing really, except a bunch of transient agitprop, which our side somehow got people to take seriously. Today, that agitprop, the counterintuitive claptrap about race, gender, and class that we have force-fed your children like geese heading for the foie gras farm, is now basically the law of the land. It makes a fella proud. What a time it was, and not only here. We all had missed the revolutions of 1848, although Dad told me that he had professors who certainly talked as if they had been right there on the barricades with Richard Wagner. But all of them could celebrate the Morningside Heights direct action and cheer on their coevals in France, where the student riots of May of 1968 nearly brought down de Gaulle. Elsewhere in Europe, students got some serious hands-on experience in revolution via such exemplars as Danny Cohen-Bendit and the Baader-Meinhof group in Germany. The immortal icon of a million T-shirts, Che Guevara, was one of our heroes, along with Carlos the Jackal, as were the Weathermen, of course, and the kidnappers of Patty Hearst. Although that little episode ended tragically for everybody but Patty, who eventually married her bodyguard. We were on a roll, all right. Naturally, I'm unbelievably grateful to the trailblazers of my father's generation. We stand on the shoulders of giants. But if I do say so myself, we have brought the vision of the heroic Frankfurt School communists to a fuller realization than even they could have hoped or dreamed.
And that was the next part of Chapter 9, Rules for Radical Conservatives by David Kahane. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades. 40 tactics to defeat the radical left.
Rule 12. Radicals form coalitions, but retrogrades form fellowships. A coalition is a group of persons who are working together for a common, intermediate purpose, but who are simultaneously working in solitary capacities for divergent, and sometimes even diametrically opposed, final purposes. Coalitions ape authentic human fraternity, but in reality, they tend to absolutize the individual, reducing peer coalition members to mere tools to be used in achieving a desired cause. Footnote: when people cooperate solely for the purpose of achieving a joint end, and not on the basis of love for God and one another, they belittle human dignity by treating each other as means rather than ends. Since God willed man's existence for the sake of man himself, it is improper to ever treat a person as a mere means. He must always be treated as an end, or else we run afoul of divine will. End of footnote. Once peer coalition members have served their purpose in achieving the intermediate cause, they may be discarded and even reviled as their usefulness has deteriorated. The dynamic between the demons in hell is akin to a coalition. Each fiend has only one true priority, himself, yet he bands together with and uses his fellow reprobates to achieve his intermediate purpose, rebellion against God. If it were possible for the demons to overthrow God, and if they achieved such arch sacrilege, they would immediately set about quarreling with each other as they pursued their individuated goals. A fellowship, on the other hand, is a group of persons cooperating for a mutual final purpose. Fellowships represent an authentic and salutary form of human fraternity, magnifying the human spirit and encouraging men to recognize the common destiny of the human race. Members of fellowships don't use each other to achieve a purpose. Instead, they cooperate in a spirit of charity, viewing the good of their peers as an end in and of itself, alongside their final goal. The dynamic between the angels in heaven is reminiscent of a fellowship. The angels are united to one another in confraternity and service, owing to their common purpose, the glorification of God Almighty. Since each angel wills, in addition to God's glory, the good of his fellows, even if it were possible for God to cease to be, and if God did in fact cease to be, each angel would continue to live in harmony with the other members of the heavenly host. So, while both coalitions and fellowships are species of focused special interest groups, they are as different as night and day. To be sure, the distinction between coalitions and fellowships is more than purely pedantic. It has real-world import, of which the retrograde must be aware. Radicals have no moral qualms about cobbling together coalitions of men who will today be co-workers but will tomorrow be enemies. For radicals, any means may be used to achieve an end deemed worthy or desirable. For radicals, even people themselves may be used as means. In practice, this means that a radical can work together with an opposing party, perhaps even a virtual enemy, if it helps bring about a desired result in the short term. Footnote. Note on a pragmatic level that modern history is replete with cautionary examples for why such a course of action should be avoided. After partnering with the Soviet Union to defeat the Axis in World War II, America had to immediately pivot to fighting fraught proxy wars against its previously allied coalition member. After partnering with Osama bin Laden to defeat the Soviets in Cold War-era Afghanistan, America had to crush an al-Qaeda organization that it had personally armed and sponsored. End of footnote. Hence, in the radical worldview, the homosexual activist and the fundamentalist Muslim can associate in a coalition dedicated to defeating their common enemy, Christendom. It matters not to the homosexual or the Muslim, for the time being, that the homosexual believes that the Muslim is repressed by archaic fideism, and that the Muslim believes the homosexual should be subject to the lash for his flamboyance. It matters not to the homosexual that the Muslim has in mind the terminal purpose of creating a worldwide caliphate. It matters not to the Muslim that the homosexual activist has in mind the terminal purpose of creating a worldwide regime of hedonism and licentiousness.
And that was first half of Rule 12 for Rules for Retrogrades by Timothy and David Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Rules for Patriots.
Yet despite all of this, I remain optimistic. God is still on the throne. My Savior lives. More and more patriots are waking up. This is still the greatest nation on earth. Providence has allowed us to live in a nation where we can at least somewhat control our own destiny. And liberty can flourish again if we have the same courage of conviction demonstrated by past generations that gave us the freedom we currently enjoy. They that have ears to hear, let them hear. While we're not out of time yet, like many of you, the left accuses of bitterly clinging to your guns and your Bibles, I believe the clock is ticking on these United States of America. We cannot sustain this moral, financial, and spiritual bankruptcy much longer. Every day I do my radio program in acknowledgement of that inconvenient truth, that sense of urgency, amplified by the fact I'm also one of the youngest nationally syndicated talk show hosts, and raising small children at home is what makes our show sound a little different than most others. See, I'm broadcasting out of a need greater and an instinct more basic than generating ratings, becoming wealthy, or even doing my part to win elections. Not that there is anything necessarily wrong with any of those things, or that I'm not motivated at least somewhat by them as well. I am human and an American after all, and I'm also male, which means I'm competitive. But those motivations pale in comparison to my prime directive, leaving behind a better future for my children and grandchildren. It's also why I'm not shy about discussing on the airwaves the integral role that faith has played in the founding of this constitutional republic, as well as my own worldview, and the fact that without returning to that faithful foundation, we have no future as a people. At the start of my program each day, we summarize our priorities this way: fear God, tell the truth, and then make money. I am one of the first grassroots, everyday American patriots from the emerging, and more, shall we say, confrontational right to be granted a platform of this magnitude. Most of the other well-meaning, successful, and talented folks in my industry come from an era when the differences between the two political parties were quite stark in the minds of most, and it was clearly us, Republicans, versus them, Democrats. Now the us versus them has completely changed. It's no longer Republicans versus Democrats like it used to be. It's now the ruling class in both political parties versus us, the American people. I come from a generation that has witnessed a murky blurring of the lines, so I am not afflicted with any nostalgic myopia.
This emerging, more confrontational right is about driving issues first, not personalities or political parties. We don't believe there's any more time left for partisan games or kicking the can down the road. Either we will commit to the right course of action and courage of conviction that will preserve this republic, or we won't. It's just that simple. Like many of you, I want to win the future for my children and grandchildren, and I don't define winning as losing a little bit slower. To win, we first need to know what we're up against. Like the two towers in the Lord of the Rings trilogy that perpetuate evil in Middle-earth, the American left is propped up by 4 pillars. The first is the child-killing industry. Abortion is the oldest and most lucrative revenue stream to the American left. On average, about 4,000 babies are killed via abortion in America each day, and the average cost is about $500 per kill. That's $2 million per day, and if you multiply that by 365 days a year, you come up with a $730 million annual industry that produces a lot of potential Democratic Party donations from Planned Parenthood, the leading child killer in the country. Now you know why Democrats will sell out racial and ethnic minorities, as well as UAW or Teamsters workers they claim to represent, but they never sell out the child killers. There's gold in them dismembered bodies. Without access to the money produced by the child-killing industry, the American left disintegrates, especially when you realize that an organization like Planned Parenthood, in addition to being the largest child killer in our nation, is also a mechanism to divert millions of dollars to its political arm, Planned Parenthood Action Fund. And that is nothing less than a shill for liberal Democrat candidates and legislation. The second pillar is the homosexual lobby. Although not as vast as the child-killing industry, through moguls like Tim Gill and David Geffen, the homosexual lobby has become one of the biggest revenue streams for the American left.
And that was the next part of Chapter 2 of Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Our job in the wider society is to be a leaven and a light and a direction. Modernity wants to make religion into a private matter. So it's like a hobby. It's like something I cultivate in my privacy. But that's not biblical at all. In the Bible, the purpose of being a Christian is to be a light for others, is to be leaven for others, is to be salt, which preserves what's worth preserving, salt that puts to death what should be put to death. That our lives are other-directed. We have a function precisely in the society. The irony is that we tend to think of religion as, well, that's not about politics and economics and society. It's about what you do in your privacy. No. We're a city on a hill. You don't hide the city on the hill. You make it more visible, right? So that's the role of Christians, is to be a sign of contradiction, a sign of direction. We exist precisely for the wider society.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand quote of the day. Quote, "Today, the very motive that draws a man to art, the quest for enjoyment, makes him run from it for his life. He runs to the gray, sunless, meaningless drudgery of his daily routine, with nothing to relieve it, nothing to expect or to enjoy. And he soon stops asking the tortured question, is there anything to see tonight? Is there anything to read? Along with art, he gives up the vision of values and forgets that he had ever hoped to find or to achieve them." Unquote. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
The war on Israel has split the Democrats.
The division was on clear display when Democrat Dean Phillips held a town hall in New Hampshire this week. He is challenging President Biden for the Democrat nomination. As the Washington Post put it, the meeting went off the rails. Israel and a ceasefire were the dividing line. Phillips could not bridge the gap. A black questioner demanded a ceasefire. Phillips tried to turn it around, asking how the woman felt about Israelis killed by Hamas. The anti-Israel questions just kept on coming. Phillips at one point had to say, quote, Rashida Tlaib, my Palestinian sister, is my friend. I'm her Jewish brother, end quote. That did not work. The questioner was escorted out. Several people walked out. Finally, when he spoke to the media, Phillips said, yeah, I support a ceasefire when Hamas is no longer in a position to murder Israelis. That is not going to satisfy the left. Demands for a ceasefire or temporary humanitarian pause, you can call it what you like, will not go away. The ceasefire brigade shuts down traffic in Durham, North Carolina, and in Philadelphia. Tomorrow, 100,000 people will march through D.C. Make no mistake, that is a pro-Hamas, pro-terrorist demonstration. With a ceasefire, they know Hamas wins. Every time Democrats get together, there will be disruptive demonstrations. The Democrat split is going to be on full display for some time to come, a long time to come. Biden's political support is eroding. Secondary Avani just getting started.
So, again, he doesn't make any value statements, although it's a situation that's ripe for value statements. One of the things that he can do is not only what should be done, but talk about how does this affect him personally? What does he feel about what's going on in Israel, in the United States? So one of the things that it strikes me with a lot of these protesters is that a lot of this is done out of fear. That the people that go along with this, the vast majority, are useful idiots. There are people that are going along with it because they're afraid to say no. Their friends, particularly on college campuses. If somebody on a college campus says to you, hey, there's going to be a pro-Palestine rally at noon out in the quad, are you going to be there? What do you tell them? Do you say, well, no, I got a trig midterm tomorrow? Or do you say, well, yeah, I guess I will be there? Then the issue is, should you just lie and go to your study anyhow? Or do you show up? So, again, fear is the motivator here. And I believe it's the motivator for all of these protests. You'll have one or two people that are leading it. But the vast majority, the rest of them are just people that are scared and intimidated and dare not say no. Remember, it is Hamas that has told the world, that put the world on notice, you screw with us, we will cut your heads off. We will burn your children. They are a threat to everybody. And so the kids in the United States, the protesters in the United States know that. If I say no to these people that want me to go out and do a pro-Palestinian protest, am I going to be their next target? So I firmly believe that it is fear that is motivating these people, and hopefully we can get into a situation where people decide that it's just not worth it. Scared or not, you got to do what's right. Back in a minute. All right, so this is from Instagram.
I'm in my 80s, and this is what I wish I knew in my 20s and 30s. Say yes to as many experiences as possible. Yes. Life is to be lived, and once you get to my age, hopefully you've done all the fabulous things that life has to offer. I never wake up thinking, I wish I could have done more. Don't wait for your life to happen. You have to live it now. I'm in my...
So this is from an account called Big Nick BH on Instagram, and it's like, so what? This is it? This is the big reveal? Oh, I'm going to tell you something that I learned in my 80s about what I should have done in my 20s, and I'm thinking it's going to be something deep and profound and with a penetrating insight. And what you do, lady, is you're so trite it's unbelievable. Everybody already in their 20s already does that. There's nobody that in their 20s that's holding back. I know people in their 20s that would go drive to Las Vegas in the middle of the night. Their coworkers would show up, knock on the door, and say, "Let's go to Vegas." Boom, they go to Vegas. People that would go out and go skydiving for the very first time in their lives. That's just what people in their 20s do. If this is the best you can come up with, Miss Nick BH or whatever your name is, shut up. And another Instagram account called Holistic University.
Reset button that's been living underneath your jaw. Slide your finger up the soft tissue at the corner of your jaw and use your fingers as leverage. You're searching for a little painful nodule. Keep your jaw soft and nasal breathe as you slide your thumb all around your jawline. Once you find the spot, exhale and sink your thumb deeper. Keep adding a little more pressure on every exhale and do this until it melts away. Once it's gone, go do that thing you were putting off.
You're kidding. You're kidding. This is some kind of a reset button under your jaw? There's a reset button under your jaw? From what medical school does that come from? The University of Huckleberry Hound? Ridiculous. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Aristotle for Everybody by Mortimer J. Adler.
Chapter 19. Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. In our courts, two standards are set for the verdict to be rendered by a jury. On questions of fact that the court submits to the jury is sometimes required to give an answer that it holds beyond a reasonable doubt. And sometimes it is sufficient if the jury's answer is one that it thinks is supported by a preponderance of the evidence. Aristotle made a somewhat similar distinction between two ways in which we can answer questions of all sorts. Like the jury's answer that is beyond a reasonable doubt, we sometimes can answer a question by a statement that has the status of knowledge. When our answers do not consist of knowledge, Aristotle calls them opinions. Opinions approach knowledge to the extent that they have the weight of the evidence on their side, at the very opposite end of the scale of those opinions that are totally unsupported by evidence. Aristotle's distinction between knowledge and opinion is a very sharp one, too sharp perhaps for us to accept without qualification. For him, when we have knowledge, what we know consists of necessary truths. We affirm such truths with certitude because they are beyond all reasonable doubt. For example, we cannot doubt that a finite whole is greater than any of its parts. If something is a finite whole, it must be greater than any of its parts. It is impossible for it not to be. Such self-evident truths constitute one example of what Aristotle means by knowledge. The other example consists of conclusions that can be validly demonstrated by premises that are self-evidently true. When we affirm such conclusions, we not only know that what they assert is true, but we also know why what they assert is true. Knowing the reasons why what they assert is true, we know that what they assert cannot be otherwise. Here, too, we are in possession of necessary truths. Aristotle in his day thought that mathematics, especially geometry, exemplified knowledge of this high quality. The view that is held of mathematics in our day does not agree with Aristotle's. Nevertheless, mathematics comes nearer than any other science to exemplifying what Aristotle meant by knowledge. Considering the truths of geometry, we can understand one other distinction that Aristotle made between knowledge and opinion. There are two ways, he says, in which one can affirm the conclusion of a geometrical demonstration. The teacher who understands the demonstration affirms the conclusion in the light of the premises that prove it. He or she has knowledge. In contrast, the student who does not understand the demonstration, but who affirms the conclusion only because the teacher said it is true, does not have knowledge. Even if the truth is itself a necessary truth, to affirm it on the authority of someone else is to hold it as a matter of opinion rather than as knowledge. For most of us, the scientific truths with which we are acquainted are opinions we hold on the authority of scientists, not knowledge that we ourselves possess. We may find this way of distinguishing between knowledge and opinion more useful as well as more acceptable. Only a very few statements are necessary truths for us, because they are self-evidently true, and their opposites are impossible. All other statements express opinions that may or may not be true. Though Aristotle would call all statements of this sort statements of opinion rather than knowledge, let us see whether we can divide opinions into two groups, one of which has some resemblance to what Aristotle meant by knowledge. The opinions we hold may either be supported by reasons and by observations, or they may be held by us without such support. For example, if I hold an opinion only because someone else told me it was true, and I myself do not have any other reason for thinking it to be true, then that is a mere opinion on my part. The statement may in fact be true. That does not make it any the less a mere opinion. So far as affirming it is concerned, I have no grounds that provide me with reasons for thinking it to be true, apart from the authority of someone else. Each of us also has a number of personal prejudices, things we hold to be true simply because we want to believe them. We have no rational grounds for believing them. Instead, we're emotionally attached to them. For example, persons often believe that their country is the best country in the world. That may or may not be true. It may even be possible to argue that it is true by citing evidence of one sort or another, or by giving reasons for thinking so. But persons who believe this usually do not cite evidence or give reasons, they just wish to believe it. The statements to which one is emotionally attached by such wishful thinking are mere opinions. Other persons may be emotionally attached to opinions that are opposite. Since neither one opinion nor the other, which may be its very opposite, is supported by reasons or evidence, one opinion of this sort is as good as another. In the case of mere opinions, everyone is entitled to prefer his or her own, those to which the individual is emotionally attached. About such opinions there can be no argument, at least none that is rational. Opinions of this sort are like expressions of personal taste in food or drink. You may like orange juice better than pineapple juice, and I may prefer pineapple juice to orange juice. You're entitled to your likes and I to mine. There is no point in our arguing about which is better. Differences of opinion become arguable only when the opinions about which we differ are not mere opinions in the sense just indicated, only when they are not simply personal prejudices, expressions of taste, or things that we wish to believe. For example, I may have good reasons for thinking that harnessing the energy of the sun will provide us with sufficient energy when we run out of fossil fuels, such as coal and oil. You may have good reasons for thinking that solar energy will not solve the problem. Each of us, in addition, may be able to cite statistics provided by careful studies of energy sources. Neither of us may be able to persuade the other. Nevertheless, the opinions we hold and about which we differ and argue are not mere opinions on our part. Let us suppose that neither of us has studied the energy problem ourselves. We have simply read what has been said by others on the subject. The opposite opinions we hold are based on the authority of others. Let us further suppose that you have most of the authorities in this field on your side, or that of the authorities that can be appealed to, you have the most expert on your side. Aristotle would say that you have the stronger case. In his view, the opinion that is held either by most men, or by most of those who are experts, or by the best qualified among the experts, is likely to turn out to be the better opinion to hold. We approach nearer to what Aristotle meant by knowledge, and we move further away from mere opinion, when the opinions held are based on scientific evidence and scientific reasoning. Those opinions that are supported by a preponderance of the evidence and by the soundest reasoning are regarded by scientists in our day as knowledge. It is not knowledge in Aristotle's sense of the term, because what we claim to know may turn out not to be the better of two opposite opinions when, by further scientific investigation, more evidence is found on the opposite side, or when, by further scientific thought, better reasons are found for holding the opposite opinion. No scientific conclusion is known by us to be finally or ultimately true beyond the possibility of correction or rejection by further investigation and further thought about the matter. The opposite of any opinion that we hold as a scientific conclusion always remains possible, because no scientific conclusion is itself a necessary truth. Nevertheless, a large number of scientific conclusions have been supported by a preponderance of the evidence and by unchallenged reasons for many centuries. The fact that new discoveries may shift the scales against these conclusions, or the fact that the reasons in favor of them may be seriously challenged by new thinking about the subject, does not prevent us from regarding such conclusions as well-established knowledge for the time being. Our scientific conclusions, supported by a preponderance of the evidence and by the best reasoning that is available at the time, the only opinions we're entitled to regard as knowledge? No. Philosophical conclusions may also be opinions that we are entitled to regard as knowledge because they are supported by sound reasoning and by the weight of the evidence that is in favor of them rather than their opposites. How do the conclusions of philosophical thought differ from the conclusions of scientific research? The answer lies in the two words thought and research. Scientific conclusions are based on the investigations undertaken by scientists, whether in laboratories or not. The thinking that scientists do to reach these conclusions never by itself suffices. It is always thinking about the observations or findings of carefully planned and carefully executed research or investigation. In contrast, philosophical thought reaches conclusions based on common experience, the kind of experience that all of us have every day of our lives without doing any research, without carefully carrying out carefully planned investigations. Philosophers do no research. They do not devise experiments or carry out investigation.
For an answer.
Philosophical thought about common experience begins with the common sense opinions that most persons hold. It improves upon such common sense opinions by being more reflective and analytical than most persons are. In my own view of the matter, it reaches its best and most refined conclusions in what I've called Aristotle's uncommon common sense. Scientific or philosophical conclusions are usually generalizations from experience, either the special experience that results from research or investigation, or the common experience that all of us have without investigation or research. As we noted in an earlier chapter, any generalization can be falsified by a single negative observation. This is as true of a philosophical as it is of a scientific generalization. The longer a generalization goes without being falsified, the more entitled we are to regard it as established knowledge, even though we can never regard it as finally or ultimately true, beyond the possibility of correction or rejection. Because philosophical conclusions are based on common rather than on special experience, because they are not affected by the results of investigation or research, conclusions of the kind that Aristotle reached more than 2,000 years ago can still claim the status of philosophical knowledge in our day. Nothing in our common experience since his time has falsified them. Most of the scientific conclusions that were currently accepted in Aristotle's day have been rejected or corrected since then. They have either been falsified by the discoveries of later research, or they have been corrected and improved by better thinking, as well as by better observations and more thorough investigations. Not all opinions that can be regarded as established knowledge take the form of scientific or philosophical generalizations from experience. Historical investigation or research reaches conclusions about particular matters of fact, the date when some event took place, the steps by which some individual became a ruler, the circumstances that led to the outbreak of a war, and so forth. Here, as in the case of science, research amasses evidence about which historians think and, in the light of their thinking, advance conclusions that they regard as supported by a preponderance of the evidence and by good reasons. When they are reached in this way, historical conclusions can be regarded as established knowledge, even though further research may change our view of the matter. We now see that there are at least 5 different kinds of knowledge, only one of which is knowledge in the strict sense that Aristotle attaches to that word. That one is the knowledge we have when we understand truths that are self-evident. The other 4 kinds are 1. The well-founded opinions of mathematical thought, the conclusions that mathematicians are able to demonstrate. 2. The well-established generalizations of scientific research or investigation. 3. The philosophical opinions that are based on common experience and on the refinement of common sense by philosophical reflection. And 4. The opinions about particular facts that historians are able to support by historical research. All four are opinions in the sense that they are never so firmly established by reasons and evidence that they cannot be falsified or corrected by further thought or new observations. Yet all four are also knowledge in the sense that at a given time they have the weight of the evidence in their favor, and the reasoning that supports them remains unchallenged.
And that was Aristotle for Everybody, chapter 19, I guess, and Difficult Thought Made Easy by Mortimer J. Adler. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.